So many distractions this morning. Apropos of this detail, Wharton's most copious biographer, R. W. B. Lewis, records that her only serious factual error was to begin a wedding ceremony with the opening words of the burial service, a mistake she swiftly corrected in subsequent editions. But for if there ever was a Freudian slip and an involuntary authorial signature, this is it. I just thought you'd enjoy that little bit. Let's see. Though easy and privileged, this is about Wharton, which now that we've read halfway through the novel, her own insights are really interesting. Wharton was brought up and brought out in the conventional manner, married at 23 to a man of her own class, and for the next 2 decades lived the life of a minor socialite with homes in New York and Newport, and extensive travels in Europe, where she had spent much of her childhood. Though easy and privileged, her life with Teddy Wharton turned out to be boring, blank, and frustrating. She knew at first hand the despair Newland Archer feels when he contemplates a lifetime alone with his wife. Isn't that sad? I thought that was really sad. So, Wharton's novel. Nope, I already read that part. If you put paper in the wrong way in the printer, the pages come out wrong. So I'm struggling. Okay. No doubt Wharton's life with Teddy, which forced her to rely very much on herself, gave added urgency to her interest in what contemporaries called the woman question. I thought you'd enjoy that too, because we have investigated the woman question many times, especially in that short story class. Wondering why women are not free to behave as men, Newland Archer ponders the double standard which judges the sexes differently, which makes victims of women and faces men with the old abysmal distinction between the woman one liked and respected and those one enjoyed and pitied. And this goes to some insights that we are going to notice in a few pages. Jane made some observations over the weekend about May's character, and so I want you to just read a few of the observations that Jane made. First of all, May advances the wedding date to Easter. Perhaps she may need to resurrect the love for Newland's love for her. She may suspect his attraction for Ellen. With their stay at the Patroon house, May coyly mentions to Newland that Ellen had told her about how enjoyable the stay at the house was. Oh, that was absolutely deliberate. Jane adds, I think May Welland is an apt name for the character. This is a good observation. Her actions are not that of a can-do, outrightly strong personality, but more that of a may-do, quieter, subtle nature, and very effective. That is indeed true. She is very effective within that facade that she has been brought up to maintain. Here's some more points about May. May's strength is shown to derive not from independence or intelligence, but from instinct and tribal loyalty. There is a clear contrast with the behavior of her rival, Ellen Olenska. Charming, cultured, sophisticated, and ready to rebel against the stuffy old manners of New York in the name of love and freedom. In the end, Ellen nevertheless accepts the ground rules of the sexual and social game as characterized by the dynasties to which both women belong. Again, this is not that good of a copy. The laws of this game are that a mistress has no rights, and that a wife may use such means as she deems necessary to preserve her marriage and the honor of her family. That's May. She's not so innocent. We'll see. Both women have long past the age of innocence. May is not simply a ruthless Well, a ruthless rival of Ellen, her wilting rival, excuse me, May proves to be a loyal and loving wife, and by her own lights, her behavior is impeccable, which is true. Her offer to renounce Archer to another woman, made before their marriage, is genuinely noble, though as Archer suspects the code of conduct by which they live makes it impossible for him to accept that offer. May knows that. Um, what especially concerned the novelists is the puzzling balance between the typicality of the spouse and the uniqueness of the individual. The typicality of the spouse versus the uniqueness of the individual. You know that Archer struggles with that too. Let's see. Where does this go now? Where's the other way? That may be all I have in this article. Yes, that is. So, a few insights into May. Um, he certainly paints her, especially in the beginning, as this innocence, the white dress and the white flowers and all of that. But we will see that she is trying to preserve her marriage because she 100 does not want to be Ellen, who is outside the norm. She doesn't want to be that. And we already know that when a woman is divorced in this era, she's socially kicking herself. All right, here's some additional points. I don't know, I may have cut off the author of that one. This is an article entitled Realism, Irony, and Morality in Wharton's The Age of Innocence. And it's written by someone whose name is Nir, N-I-R, Evren, from Stanford University. By making Newland Archer's age at the end of Age of Innocence the same as hers at the time of writing, Edith Wharton clearly urges a comparison between herself and her protagonists. Wharton shares significantly with Archer. Is neither character nor biography, but rather a particular situation, that of outliving the world that had formed her. Okay. Wharton was also tougher of mind. Her view of the lost world of her youth, her ideas regarding human nature, and her quasi-Freudian insight into the prize exacted by the process of civilization were both harsher and more nuanced than anything the genial Archer may have thoroughly grasped or consistently held. Her sense of affiliation to the social circles in which she moved was likewise more ambiguous than his. Though an old New York bred elitist to the marrow, Wharton had no illusions about her milieu, and was never as beholden to its strictness as are the New Yorkers she depicts. Instead, she used her intimate knowledge of this clannish society's customs and prejudices to become one of its most devastating critics, much more so than James, who was too enamored of the nuanced spectacle of the leisured class existence. I'm thinking that I've read this before. Or Fitzgerald, as Irving Howe points out, came to the subject of wealth as a bedazzled outsider. I'm really pretty sure I did. In short, though Wharton and Archer belong to the same tribe, neither a common outlook, nor a similar psychological constitution, nor still a comparable set of life choices. In fact, in those respect, it's probably Ellen Olenska, not Archer, who resembles her author most closely. At root, The Age of Innocence is a meditation on the transience of a cultural world. Okay, I think I have a note to myself. Read this at the end. Yes, because the rest of this article gives away the story, so we'll keep that for later. So, here are some more interesting tidbits into May. And we're going to keep an eye out for some of this. The innocent, fair May Welland and the experienced, dark Ellen Olenska appear to be direct opposites of each other, representing the familiar virgin whore binary. And this is even illustrated on the cover of the book. Look at how dark she is and how white and pure she is. This essay, oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you who this is. It's called Trying It On, Narration and Masking in the Age of Innocence. It's by someone named Margaret Jessee, Jessee, at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Let's see. This essay examines Wharton's text as it consistently questions the binary through formal and thematic interrogations of various distinctions. The thematic oscillation between woman as traditionally conforming, innocent virgin on the one hand, and threatening, corrupting temptress on the other, place on the formal level as the narration calls into question the reality of any meaningful distinction between apparently oppositional binaries. And of course, she's going to debunk that. This binary is not the point between the two women. That would be my dryer. Sorry. All my appliances are going off. So in many ways, May Welland figures the old traditional New York of Newland's youth, while Countess Ellen Olenska figures the new progression, a world where people look forward rather than backward. May is repeatedly described as the fair, blonde innocent, while Ellen is the dark foreigner who poses a threat by her potential to evoke transition to destroy the old. Now, that is a pretty simplistic way of looking at this because, in some ways, Ellen is very appealing. With May and Ellen as representatives of opposing female stereotypes, the novel creates a series of binaries between old and new, virgin and whore, and fair and dark. You can hear the however. However, the result is not a novel that maintains these dichotomies. Instead, on the thematic level, the Age of Innocence interrogates binaries by repeatedly throwing into questions distinctions between what is actual and what is Newland's misperception, particularly in the second book. You will see his mind wandering off, and he imagines what will happen, and then it doesn't. Reality comes back. As a result, Newland places onto May and Ellen what he believes are their appropriate masks. He separates them into their respective roles, ones he misinterprets as the real thing, beneath their outward appearance. On the formal level, the free, indirect discourse works to complicate the distinction between the narrator and the character. So what we'll see is that he imagines things particularly having to do with Ellen and May, and then the narrator tells us differently. These distinctions between old and new, family and foreigner, innocent and threatening, are thus thrown into question through a narrative that questions Newland's perspective. The novel consistently figures the oppositional distinctions that he creates as mere masks, as way of trying on another's view. So this is not the kind of novel that was examining the superficial. And you can see why Wharton was so mad when her novel was taken as the one that is most representative of the American psyche, because she was satirizing it. If we go on here, let's see. Oh yes. This goes to May. There's much more in this article, but for this question of May. But Newland's simplistic notion of May's innocence is troubled by the narrator's description of her as being more cunning than Newland ever suspects. And I went on this tangent because of Jane's observations. They were very interesting. May proves herself far less innocent than Newland casts her. When he pushes her again to hasten their wedding, May, and this is a quote, bows her head, vanishing from him under her conniving hat brim. Conniving is an interesting word choice. Conniving, like trying it on. Remember when Ellen came into the opera box in the first chapter, and people were kind of aghast because that kind of woman, the temptress, the divorcee, could contaminate May. But the observation was they were surprised that the Mingots tried it on. They were kind of testing the waters to see how people would respond to bringing Ellen Olenska back into the fold. Conniving, as I started to say, like trying it on, contains a double meaning. In this case, hiding one's eyes as well as being covert deceptive. Though Newland assumes May is innocent to a fault, the narrative dissonance between what Newland perceives and what the narrator relates reveals May as cunning and conniving, a character who deceptively tries things on with regard to Newland throughout the novel. When Newland asks if she understands how much he wishes to marry her, May's mask of innocence slips. She raises her eyes on him, and they reveal a despairing clearness, a hopeless clarity, an abysmal understanding of the situation. In other words, already then she knows that Newland is has an interest in Ellen, and she's not having it. But May maintains the role that she has been taught to maintain, which is dignified and hanging on to what has already been set up. If you remember when she's sitting in that opera box, that was so revealing, she was watching the character, the main female character, was wearing white, the obvious connection. And May was looking down, and Archer thought she was innocent of the temptation that the character was providing. That she was so innocent that she didn't understand the storyline. But of course, we're led to believe by the narrator that she did. May tells Newland that he mustn't, this is a quote, mustn't think that a girl knows as little as her parents imagine. One hears and one notices. One has one's feelings and ideas. May is not, in other words, the innocent girl with abysmal purity. Abysmal in this account might mean endless purity. Of course, it's got some negative connotation. With her conniving hat brim temporarily veiling her look of despairing clearness, combined with Newland's assumption that she is gullible, the narrative produces a May Welland who is not only more knowing and less innocent than Newland suspects. So, yes, Jane, I think you were absolutely correct in your observations. She knows what's going on. Do I have anything else here? She's one who represents a femininity disguising behind false decoration, using her beauty and finery as a vehicle to dazzle men to their destruction. Yes. Hey. So I hope that gives you a little insight into May Welland's character. Wharton is just too good a writer, too good a storyteller to make this about the dichotomies. There's much more behind the scenes. So if we go to the text, um, I believe we are starting on page 170. I know that because I've got my little bit of paper that says start. I can't ever remember. So I was very struck by the first sentence of chapter 21. The small, bright lawn stretched away smoothly to the big, bright sea. Doesn't that almost sound like a haiku? I thought it did. I tried to, it isn't. I tried to figure it out, but it's not. But what she has here is a perfect scene. It's perfect in its setup. The turf was hemmed with an edge of scarlet geranium and coleus, and cast iron vases painted in chocolate color, standing at intervals along the winding path that led to the sea, looped their garlands of petunia and ivy geranium above the neatly raked gravel. Isn't that beautiful? It's just absolutely beautiful. Um, as I am now spending my days, since the jail class is still suspended, I'm spending the days taking apart my petunias and coleus and raking. Do a lot of raking. Um, in fact, if you look in this next paragraph, this looks to me like Monet. Halfway between the edge of the cliff and the square wooden house, which was also chocolate colored, but with the tin roof of the veranda striped in yellow and brown to represent an awning, two large targets had been placed against a background of shrubbery. On the other side of the lawn, facing the targets, was pitched a real tent with benches and garden seats about it. A number of ladies in summer dresses and gentlemen in gray frock coats and tall hats stood on the lawn or sat upon the benches, and every now and then a slender girl in stretched muslin would step from the tent, bow in hand, speed her shaft at one of the targets, while the spectators interrupted their talk to watch the result. They're shooting at targets. Um, then at the top of page 171. So anyway, they're at a archery event. Um, But at the very first line on the top of 171, the floors were islanded with chintz poofs. Do you know what that is? I had to look it up. It's a stuffed ottoman, and they're round. And so, as usual, Wharton is describing the furniture and the things in the rooms. Um, Dwarfed armchairs and velvet tables covered with trifles in silver. Such a clear picture. So this is the Newport Archery Club. At the end of this paragraph, as an opportunity to show off pretty dresses and graceful attitudes, the bow and arrow held their own. Remember, we have seen this before, where the women, especially the ones on the marriage market, posture as though they are being looked at in a picture. And that's exactly what that is. He looked down with wonder at the familiar spectacle. It surprised him that life should be going on in the old way, with his own reactions to it had so completely changed. So he's got one foot in the new and one foot in the old, and he doesn't. It's like he's observing it and not participating. A few lines later, as yeah, let's see. May had settled down in the new greenish-yellow house with the bow window and the Pompeian vestibule. He had dropped back with relief into the old routine of the office, and the renewal of his daily activity had served as a link with his former self. So his newer self was, of course, brought out by Ellen. But the routine in New York continues, and this whole rest of this paragraph is about this routine. Um, He, at the Century, this is a few lines down, at the Century he had found Winsett again, and at the Knickerbocker the fashionable young men of his own set, and what with the hours dedicated to the law and those given to dining out or entertaining friends at home, with an occasional evening at the opera or the play, the life he was living had still seemed fairly real and inevitable sort of business. Um, so the routine continues. However, but Newport represented the escape from duty into an atmosphere of unmitigated holiday making. So they've gone off to Newport, but like in that essay that I read, this was the life that Wharton was so familiar with. At the top of page 172, but the Wellens always went to Newport. Where they owned one of the square boxes on the cliffs, and their son-in-law could adduce no good reason why he and May should not join them there. They brought all their summer clothes in Paris. This argument was of a kind to which Archer had yet found no answer. So, of course they'd go. Absolutely, of course. Why would we have bought all those dresses in Paris? Such backwards logic. May herself could not understand his obscure reluctance to fall in with so reasonable and pleasant a way of spending the summer. It's that picture we just saw. But it came to him with a shiver that he was not going to like it at all. It was not May's fault. Poor dear. Here is Archer foisting this kind of innocence on her. If now and then during their travels they had fallen slightly out of step, harmony had been restored by the return to the conditions she was used to. Remember, this was a couple chapters ago when they were on their honeymoon. Archer discovered that she didn't really like to travel, and that she wasn't that fond of being out of her element. Down at the end of this paragraph, and she had represented peace, stability, comradeship, and the steadying sense of unescapable duty. We're going to see that she very handily orchestrates their life. And we just saw that on the preceding page. Everything is back to the norm that she is driving from this behind the scenes. He could not say that he had been mistaken in his choice, for she had fulfilled all that he had expected. At the top of 173, but the idea that he could ever, in his senses, have dreamed of marrying the Countess Olenska had become almost unthinkable, and she remained in his memory simply as the most plaintive and poignant of a line of ghosts. Remember the double standard that he almost stepped out and didn't because May was able to move the wedding date up, and of course Archer discovered that it was in less than a month. But with all these abstractions and eliminations made of his mind, it made his mind a rather empty and echoing place, like children playing in a graveyard. Now that's kind of an odd reference, like children playing in a graveyard, but at the time, now this is in 1870, and I don't know if you've looked at the Gettysburg Address lately, maybe not. But the Gettysburg Address took place at the dedication of a graveyard. And at this time, and of course, Lincoln died in 1863, so this was just 7 years earlier. At the time, there was something idealized about children playing in a graveyard. It was a way of children being connected to their mortality without really frightening them. But just picture in your mind little girls in white dresses with ribbons running around behind gravestones and playing with their little brothers. This really was an idealized kind of picture. So, as if they had been children playing in a graveyard is a reference to that kind of scenery. She's wearing a limp. Oh wait, is this? Yeah, this is Medora. She comes in. She's always festooned with all kinds of stuff. She's wearing a limp leghorn hat anchored to her head by many windings of faded gauze. I actually know what a leghorn hat is. This one is tied to her head. Look at that. That's it. That's a leghorn hat. and it's tied with gauze. Now, this is, of course, the idealized American beauty. Medora is an eccentric. Um, I just mentioned that because I knew what a leghorn hat was. But marriage is, let's see, she cocked up her head. This is the end of this paragraph on 173. She cocked her head on one side and languished at him through screwed up eyes. But marriage is one long sacrifice, as I used often to remind my Ellen. Medora has had several marriages, and each time her situation becomes more and more declined. Archer's heart stopped with the queer jerk which it had given once before, and which seemed suddenly to slam a door between himself and the outer world. So, so Archer is aware. He's aware enough to know that there is another world, but he doesn't act on it, um, and allows the door to slam. So, if Medora is telling him that marriage is one long sacrifice, he's got a long way to go, and it's all one big sacrifice. Just wrecked my hair. On the next page, 175, at the top, a contrast indeed to this gay scene of worldly pleasure, but then I have always lived on contrasts. To me, the only death is monotony. I always say to Ellen, beware of beware of monotony. It's the mother of all the deadly sins. Oh, I just really think that line is interesting. Oops, cursor here. When the door was still open, let's see. But shall we go down and watch this absorbing match? And I wrote in the margin, not. It's not absorbing. It's boring, monotonous. But here's these young women, the marriageable ones, out there posturing. I think I've only shot a bow and arrow once, and it twanged me in the face and left a bad bruise. It's not my sport. Um, let's see. Beaufort has made another appearance. Next paragraph, there were all sorts of rumors afloat about Beaufort. Remember, this is this banker who left under kind of dicey left London from because of dicey circumstances, but now there's rumors about him. Beaufort's fortune was substantial enough to stand the strain, and yet the disquieting rumors persisted. He's got enough money that he sets up this archery contest every year, and every time a rumor appears, he spends some other huge, extravagant expense. The Marquioness reply. This is over on 175, towards the top of the page. Here comes Beaufort. The Marquioness replied by one of her queer foreign jerks, and a que voulez-vous, which means, what do you expect? Which deepened Beaufort's frown, but he produced a good semblance of a congratulatory smile as he glanced at Archer to say, you know May's going to carry off the first prize. So she does win. I think the interesting language on this page is, once again, in her white dress with pale green ribbon about the waist and a wreath of ivy on her head, she had the Diana-like aloofness as when she had entered the Beaufort ballroom on the night of her engagement. Every picture I see of Diana, I wasn't able to print this, and I'm not sure what was the flaw, but there's a statue of Diana. It's a white marble statue, and that's what May looks like. Of course, a marble statue doesn't have much below the surface. And we're not sure if May does or not. Well, we do. We know she does. In the interval, not a thought seemed to have passed behind her eyes or a feeling through her heart. And though her husband knew that she had the capacity for both, he marveled afresh at the way in which experience dropped away from her. And he's misperceiving that. It isn't that that experience is dropping away from her. She just covers it. Next paragraph. The attitude was so full. Here she comes. I forgot to bring my phone in here. That's how I keep my book from falling down. She's out there like this, She had her bow and arrow in her hand, and placing herself at the chalk mark traced on the turf, she lifted the bow to her shoulder and took aim. I have this electronic dartboard down in the basement that my son and two sons-in-laws love to play. And there's this line on the floor where they're supposed to stand, and you should hear them howling if somebody crosses over that line. Uh, just an aside. Um, the attitude was so full of a classic grace that a murmur of appreciation followed her appearance, and Archer felt the glow of proprietorship that so often cheated him into momentary well-being. So, um, that's mine. That one. She's mine. Down at the bottom, all were young and pretty, bathed in summer bloom, but not one had the nymph-like ease of his wife. Nymph-like. See, he's imposing that on her. Um, the next page, top of 176, Archer felt irrationally angry. Oh, that's because of Lefferts. Not one of the lot holds the bow as she does. And Beaufort retorted, yes, that's the only kind of target she'll ever hit. It was not very nice. And Archer felt irrationally angry. His host's contemptuous tribute to May's niceness, this innocence, was just what a husband should have wished to hear said of his wife. Um, so Beaufort's kind of creepy. The fact that a coarse minded man found her lacking in attraction was simply another proof of her quality. Again, he's imposing this. Yet the words sent a faint shiver through his heart. What if niceness, carried to that supreme degree, were only a negation, the curtain dropped before an emptiness? Well, he keeps describing her as this innocent and pure, this this flowy Diana-like facade. But we'll see her a little bit more conniving later on. Um, let's see if we look at the top of page 177. Oh, this starts on the preceding page. In this unfashionable region, Catherine the Great, always indifferent to precedent and thrifty of purse, I have to remember that, thrifty of purse, had built herself in her youth a many-peaked and cross-beamed cottage ornée on a bit of cheap land overlooking the bay. I know what that is. Here is a cottage ornée. There were actually many examples of them. I thought this was one of the ones that was the most appealing and really um, went along with this description. The words that go with it, cottage ornate or decorated cottage, dates back to a movement of rustic styled cottages of the late 18th and early 19th century during the Romantic movement, when some sought to discover a more natural way of living as opposed to the formality of the preceding Baroque and neoclassic architectural styles. And look at how the roof is. I think this one had a thatched roof on top. See, I think that's thatched. And this is tiled. But you can, in some ways, we still buy into this because people still go up north. People from Milwaukee say that up north. I'm going up north. It's not up because up's that way, but um, we do this. We go to cottages and state parks and we enjoy this kind of roughing it. Although I'm not going to sleep in a tent. I bet you aren't either. I'll stay in a hotel. But we do like to escape and get it. It's kind of like Yeats' poem of returning to Innisfree. It's something that we remember with nostalgia. Same thing with this cottage ornate. That was what Catherine was trying to achieve. Here in a thicket of stunted oaks, her verandas spread themselves above the island-dotted waters. It actually sounds really beautiful. A winding drive led up between iron stags and blue glass balls embedded in mounds of geraniums. You know what those blue glass balls are, don't you? People have them. You may have one. It's those balls that sit on a bird bath. In this case, they're dug into the geraniums, but I I just liked that detail. So, um, then at the end of this paragraph is a word that we've seen before. Uh, let's see, this is Mrs. Mingat with a burden of flesh descended on her, and in the adjoining one she spent her days enthroned in a large armchair between the open door and window, and perpetually waving a palm leaf fan, which the prodigious projection of her bosom kept so far from the rest of her person that the air it set in motion stirred only the fringe of the anti-macassars on the armchairs. You know what those are? Those are those doilies that are back here and on the arms of stuffed furniture. I just like the detail in this couple of pages. Um, since she had been the means of hastening his marriage, old Catherine had shown to Archer the cordiality which a service rendered excited towards the person served. Such a funny sentence. Um, there was no doubt that Beaufort did things handsomely. We know that already. If we look on page 178, Mrs. Mingot bangs her cane on the floor, and a mulatto maidservant in a bright turban applied. Every once in a while, one of these exotic characters appears in the novel, and here's another one, a mulatto maidservant. Um, and then if we look at, let's see, it begins at the bottom of 178. He had listened to these accounts and to various contradictory reports on her appearance, her conversation, her point of view, and her choice of friends with the detachment with which one listens to reminiscences of someone long since dead. Not till Medora suddenly spoke her name at the archery match had Ellen Olenska become a living presence to him again. He was twitterpated by her a year and a half ago, got married, immersed himself back in his old world, and then Medora brings her up. And bam! The door opens again. Mid page on 179, from the willow walk projected a slight wooden pier, ending in a sort of pagoda like summer house, and in the pagoda a lady stood, leaning against the rail, her back to the shore. It's Ellen. Archer stopped at the sight as if he had waked from sleep. Um, that vision of the past was a dream, and the reality was what awaited him in the house on the bank overhead. Was Mrs. Welland pony carriage circling around and around the oval at the door? Was May sitting under the shameless Olympians and glowing with secret hopes? Everything is the same. It's every. He expects it to be one way, and it is. Um, and he's been sent to fetch Ellen, but she's standing there at the end of this pier and doesn't turn around. So he leaves. And in several chapters, she's going to reveal that she knew he was there and didn't turn around. At the top of the next page, on page 180, that the boat was gliding out to the receding tide. It slid before the lime rock, blotted out Ida Lewis's little house, and passed along the turret in which the light was hung. I'm not even sure why I underlined that. Oh, she's the lighthouse keeper. Couldn't remember who that was. And then an important passage at the bottom of 180. May said, "I'm sorry you didn't find Ellen. We have a different view of her now. She's not sorry. Not sorry." "I should have liked to see her again," May said as they drove home through the dusk, "but perhaps she wouldn't have cared. She seems so changed." "Changed?" echoed Archer in a colorless voice, his eyes fixed on the pony's twitching ears. "So indifferent to her friends." "May is coloring Ellen a little bit. I mean, giving up New York and her house, spending her time with such queer people. Fancy how hideously uncomfortable she must be at the Blankers. She says she does it to keep Medora out of mischief. to prevent her from marrying dreadful people, but I sometimes think we've always bored her. And we now think that May is laying these little bits of information. Next paragraph. Archer made no answer, and she continued with a tinge of hardness that he had never before noticed in her frank, fresh voice. After all, I wonder if she wouldn't be happier with her husband. If you are a margin star person, this is one you should star, because this is exactly what that article talked about with May. We have Archer's perception of her frank, fresh face. And yet we have the narrator telling us that there is a tinge of hardness in her voice. She should go back to her husband. Tell that it's a little bit nasty. Next paragraph. He burst into a laugh. Sancta simplicitas, he exclaimed, as she turned a puzzled frown on him and added, I don't think I ever heard you say a cruel thing before. Well, Sancta Simplicitas means holy innocence. And when I read about this, the conclusion the critics have suggested is that he is saying it ironically. You are not that innocent, are you? So this is a really important clue, a little nugget about May and her facade, but what's lying behind the facade is that she's going to preserve what she's got. And Ellen is not going to wreck it for her. The top of page 181. It's a pity she ever married abroad then, said May, in a placid tone. There's the placid tone, with which her mother met Mr. Welland's vagaries. Archer felt himself gently relegated to the category of unreasonable husbands. So again, there's May doing this deliberately. The next paragraph, we just see another chronicle of the sameness. Even though they've gone to Newport, it's still the same. Lights were already shining through its windows, and Archer, as the carriage stopped, caught a glimpse of his father-in-law, exactly as he had pictured him, pacing the drawing-room, watch in hand, wearing the pained expression that he had long since found to be much more efficacious than anger. So here's the father-in-law putting on a bit of a facade. Remember, we'll look at this in the next paragraph. The young man, as he followed his wife into the hall, was conscious of a curious reversal of mood. There was something about the luxury of the Welland house and the density of the Welland atmosphere, so charged with minute observances and exactions, they always stole into his system like a narcotic. So everything there is nuanced. There's subtleties of people's behavior that mean things that no one talks about, but they're still there. Next few lines. The whole chain of tyrannical trifles, that's it, tyrannical trifles, binding one hour to the next, and each member of the household to all the others, made any less systematized and affluent existence seem unreal and precarious. But now it was the Welland house, and the life he had expected to lead in it, that had become unreal and irrelevant. It's because, Ellen has come back into his consciousness. And the brief scene on the shore where he had stood irresolute, halfway down the bank, was close to him as the blood in his veins. He's really being torn. Next, chapter 22. So the blinkers. Did I read everything there? The blankers, they're newcomers on the block. And you're either going to embrace the new people or you're going to try to keep them out. And that's essentially what that article about the dichotomies was saying. A party for the blankers. The blankers. Like they're the peasants. Good gracious, Mr. Welland gasped, as if a second reading had been necessary to bring the monstrous absurdity of the thing home to him. Um, and then there's another paragraph here about this Professor Emerson Sillerton was a thorn in the side of the Newport Society. Getting us back to the Newport Society. He was, as people said, a man who had had every advantage, like most of them. Down at the bottom, he didn't have to be he's an archaeologist, but he didn't have to be or to live in Newport in winter, or to do any of the other revolutionary things that he did. But at least if he was going to break with tradition and flout society in the face, he need not have married poor Amy Dagonet, who had a right to expect something different and money enough to keep her own carriage. So just reminding us of the details of and the details that tell something about people. No one in the Mingot set could understand why Amy Sillerton had submitted so tamely to the eccentricities of a husband who had filled the house with long-haired men and short-haired women. I just underlined that because the short-haired women, of course, we're going to see the bobbed hair in a couple of decades. And long-haired men, those are the Bohemians. Uh, but there they were, set in their ways and apparently unaware that they were different from other people. But everybody else noticed. And that's the point. The point is that everybody else noticed the violations of this couple. Um, let's see, they had a party last year during, oh yeah, do you remember 2 years ago they're giving a party for a black man? On the day of Julia Mingot's, the Tay Dansette. I didn't know what that was. It's a lawn party tea. And sometimes there was a dance afterwards. And these people had the audacity to have an event that competed. Let's see, down at the bottom of page 183, it was a principle. Again, it was a principle of the tribes in the Welland family that people's days and hours should be what Mrs. Welland called provided for. This is what May has been taught. And so she is also going to provide for the time in Archer's day, but she does it with such finesse that he sometimes doesn't even realize that she's creating this. Last sentence on the 183. Another of her principles was that parents should never, at least visibly, interfere with the plans of their married children. If they're going to interfere in the plans of the married children, do it from behind the scenes. It's still kind of a principle nowadays, I think. In the middle of the page, 184, Newland never seems to look ahead, Mrs. Welland once ventured to complain to her daughter, and May answered serenely, No, but you see it doesn't matter, because when there's nothing particular to do, he reads a book. Kind of putting him in the category of a little bohemian. On the top of 185, or it's about a third of the way down. Let's see. He had a feeling of unexplained excitement with which, on half holidays at school, he used to start off into the unknown, taking his pair at an easy gait. He's decided that he's heard where he thinks Ellen is, and he's going to go off and see just at least where she lives. He's just going to like spy on her. We call that, what do we call that? Stalking. I don't think he would have figured it to be stalking. He just wants to see where she lives. He would have 4 golden hours to dispose of. So he knows what he's up to. As soon as he heard of the Sillertons' party, he had said to himself that the Marchioness Manson would certainly come to Newport with the Blankers, and that Madame Olenska might again take the opportunity of spending the day with her grandmother. So he just wants to see her, that's all. Down at the bottom of this page. Interesting language. This is about a quarter of the way up. But ever since he had looked at her from the path above the bay, he had wanted, irrationally and indescribably, to see the place she was living in and to follow the movements of her imagined figure as he had watched the real one in the summer house. There is again that same interplay between what is inside his head and what is reality. The longing was with him day and night, an incessant, undefinable craving, like the sudden whim of a sick man for food or drink once tasted and long since forgotten. The language Wharton gives him is like an addict. This is addictive behavior, for he was not conscious of any wish to speak to Madame Olenska or to hear her voice. He was not conscious. He simply felt that if he could carry away the vision of the spot of earth she walked on, the way the sky and the sea enclosed it, the rest of the world might seem less empty. So this notion of her is still there, but he is not even conscious of what he's doing. Uh, so he walks up to this property where he figures that she's staying, and interestingly, he walks past. There's a little wooden cupid who has lost his bow and arrow but continued to take an ineffectual aim. Certainly, this is a reference to the archery party. Certainly, but the bow and arrow is it's missing. And there's another reference, next paragraph. Archer leaned for a while against the gate. No one was in sight, and not a sound came from the open windows of the house. A grizzled Newfoundland dozing before the door seemed as ineffectual a guardian as the arrowless Cupid. Ineffectual. It was strange to think that this place of silence and decay was the home of the turbulent Blankers, the newcomers again. He sees on page 187 a pink parasol, but instead he crossed the lawn and turned towards the box garden. This is on 187. As he entered it, he caught sight of something bright colored in the summer house and presently made it out to be a pink parasol. The parasol drew him like a magnet. He was sure it was hers. So again, his imagined perception of the scene and what's true. He went into the summer house and sitting down on the rickety seat, picked up the silken thing and looked at its carved handle, which was made of some rare wood that gave out an aromatic scent. He thinks it's Ellen's. He imagines it's Ellen's, but it's really the youngest and largest of the Blanker girls. Largest, excuse me, sometimes Wharton is so funny. The youngest and largest of the Blanker girls, blonde and blousy in bedraggled muslin. So he's got her parasol. It's hers. It's not Ellen's. There's nothing romantic about this parasol. So if we look on page 188, the young girl, um, she says at the end of that incomplete paragraph, of course, she added gaily, I shouldn't have minded half as much if I had known you were coming. And then another funny phrase from Wharton, symptoms of a lumbering coquetry became visible in her. Oh, poor thing, she's not doing very well. And Archer found the strength to break in. But Madame Olenska, has she gone to Newport? Oh, she's been called away. This takes us to other events. At the bottom of page 188, she reveals that a telegram came for Ellen, and at the bottom of the page, Archer was dealing hurriedly with crowded thoughts. His whole future seemed suddenly to be unrolled before him. There's more of this fantasy life he's got going, and passing down it's not really a fantasy; it's imagined. And passing down its endless emptiness, he saw the dwindling figure of a man to whom nothing was ever to happen. Yeah, that's him. Next couple of lines go again to this dreamy, his dreaminess. He glanced about him at the unpruned garden, the tumble-down house, and the oak grove under which the dusk was gathering. It had seemed so exactly the place in which he ought to have found Madame Olenska, and she was far away, and even the pink sunshade was not hers. There is that contrast between what's going on in his head and what the narrator tells us. He at length, with his hostess still at his side, he passed out of range of the wooden Cupid, the ineffectual wooden Cupid. So he unfastens his horses and drives off. The next chapter on page 190. I have another picture to show you. Oh yeah, we'll get to this. The next morning, he got out of on the River train. He emerged upon a steaming midsummer Boston. I think that is this the chapter where everybody's hot? The streets near the station were full of the smell of beer and coffee and decaying fruit, yes, and a short-sleeved populace moving through them with the intimate abandon of boarders going down the passage to the bathroom. I think that's hilarious. So everybody has taken off their outerwear, and they're now shirt sleeved because it's so hot. So and one wouldn't it's much more casual to roll up your sleeves, like you would if you are. Oh, I'm sure you've seen this. If you ever stay in hotels, I like to stay in the one with the breakfast downstairs, um, just because it really solves problem number one of the morning. And inevitably, there's a crowd in there. Of course, now nobody's going to go into one of those anymore. But and there's always some family wearing pajamas. A whole bunch of kids and the parents and everybody wearing their pajamas. And I'm always mystified. And then I point out to my kids, never go to the lobby in your pajamas. But anyway, this is that attitude, the shirt sleeve populace moving through them with an intimate abandon of borders. Uh, Archer found a cab, drove to the Somerset Club for breakfast. Even the fashionable quarters had the air of untidy domesticity to which no excess of heat ever degrades the European cities. Um, so it's hot. There's no air conditioning. People are a little bit more casual than usual. He had business. He tells his wife that he has business in Boston, which we know is a Bald-Faced Lie, but luckily a letter came from the office, which fate had conspicuously placed on a corner of the hall table, sufficed to justify his sudden change of plan. He was even ashamed of the ease with which the whole thing had been done. So he knows that he's doing something that is probably not acceptable, and he lies about it. Top of page 191. Um, Smoked a cigarette while he was thus engaged. 2 or 3 men he knew came in, and the usual greetings were exchanged, and it was the same world after all, though he had a queer sense of having slipped through the meshes of time and space. So he has resumed his role, but something has changed in him. Um, the city had, mid-page, the city had suddenly become as strange and vast and empty as if he were a traveler from distant lands. Down at the bottom of this page, um, let's see, who is this again? Oh, she said, and for the first time he noticed a startled look on her face. Oh, he's come upon Ellen. Now, Ellen's in Boston. This does not compute. Um, and for the first time he noticed a startled look on her face, but in another moment it gave way to a slow smile of wonder and contentment. Um, so here he is chasing after her because the Blanker girl had told him where she went, and he comes upon her. The top of 192. I'm here on business, Archer says, and without knowing why, he suddenly began to feign astonishment at seeing her. But what on earth are you doing in this wilderness? He really had no idea what he was saying. He felt as if he were shouting at her across endless distances. Um, and so he comes upon her. He had not even remembered that it was a low pitched with a faint roughness in the oh, that's her voice. Her voice is low pitched with faint roughness in the consonants. I'm thinking that because she has lived in Europe for so many years and lived in the home of a Polish count, that she probably has a bit of an accent. Um, Sort of like when my daughter returned from Australia after having been there for months and months and months, some of her consonants were a little off. Took her a while to recover. Um, so he comes across her, and she left in such a hurry that here she's doing something that's unconventional. She left without her maid. Nastasia is not there. Remember her? I keep chuckling about the word swarthy. So you were alone at the Parker house? That's unconventional. Um, and she says, unconventional? I see, I suppose it is. She considers a moment, but I hadn't thought of it because I've just done something so much more unconventional. A faint tinge of irony lingered in her eyes. I have refused to take back a sum of money that belonged to me. So we're beginning to get the details. There was a telegram. It sent her quickly to Boston. Now she's rejected something that belonged to her. Well, we guess what's going on. Olenski has made her another offer. And she says at the top of 193, I refused. He sat down by her again. What were the conditions? Oh, they were not onerous, just to sit at the head of his table now and then. But even that is more than she can do. Mid-page 193. She shook her head. No, just a message. He never writes. I don't think I've had more than one letter from him. You know what letter that is. That's the one that Archer read when he was given the packet of papers about Ellen from his superior at the law firm in order to convince him to talk her out of getting a divorce. There's the letter right there. The illusion brought the color to her cheek, and it reflected itself in Archer's vivid blush. So they both know. On the top of page 194, here again appears the world that he's thinking and what the narrator will tell us. Let's see. They sat silent, not looking at each other, but straight ahead at the people passing along the path. Finally, she turned her eyes again to his face and said, You're not changed. He felt like answering, I was, till I saw you again. And that's exactly what happened. But instead, he stood up abruptly and glanced about him at the untidy, sweltering park. Mid-page 194. I'll say something you like, or nothing. I won't open my mouth unless you tell me to. What harm can it do to anybody? All I want is to listen to you. So he's not admitting how smitten he is. In my mother had this word, Twitter-pated. He is. On the top of 195, let's see. I knew you were there when you. This is the reference to her standing at the end of the pier. He says, I knew you were there. When you drove in, I recognized the ponies, so I went down to the beach. To get away from me as far as you could? She repeated in a low voice, to get away from you as far as I could. So we're getting a little insight into her now. Well, you see, it's no use. I may as well tell you, he added, that the business I came here for was just to find you. And then in the next paragraph, he says you can write a note, and he happens to because there's someone, an emissary coming from. There's Daphne again. There's an emissary coming from Olenski, or there's some sort of exchange going from this emissary, and so he Archer proposes they go on a little trip together to get out on a boat, and so you have to leave a note, he tells her, for this emissary. And the reason I bring this up is because he drew out a note case. I'm sure that the note case is something tantamount to my endless use of sticky notes and one of the new stylographic pens. That's a fountain pen. I even got an envelope. You see how everything's predestined. There, steady the thing on your knee, and I'll get the pen going in a second. If you've ever used a fountain pen, they sometimes get dried up on the end, and then you have to scratch it. It's kind of like a regular pen anyway. So I just brought that up because I liked that reference. And then down at the bottom of page 195, they walk back towards Beacon Street. And near the club, Archer caught sight of the plush-lined Herdick, which had carried his note to the Parker house and whose driver was reposing from this effort by bathing his brow at the corner hydrant. Well, this is a Herdick. And they functioned at the time like a kind of bus. A herdic is a type of horse-drawn carriage used as an omnibus, invented by Peter Herdick of Williamsport, Lycoming County, Pennsylvania, in 1881. A predecessor of the taxicab, the herdic was a small two-wheeled carriage that had side seats and an entrance at the back. Side seats. So you would look out the sides right here and you'd step in the back as this fellow is doing right there. Remember that one author said that Wharton chronicled even the paths that they took as they walked through the various locations. So he's all excited because there's this cab. Here's a cab for us. You see, they laughed, astonished at the miracle of picking up a public conveyance at that hour in that unlikely spot in a city where cab stands were still a foreign novelty. That's why I made it, looked it up and it showed you. Two paragraphs later, he waited, pacing up and down before the herdic. So he has sent Ellen in with this note to flag down whatever emissary she's talking to. We don't know yet. And a Sicilian youth with eyes like Natasia's offered to shine his boots, and an Irish matron to sell him peaches. The city's full of immigrants, the Irish and the Italians. Of course, they came at about the same time. At the top of 197, what Wharton is trying to do there is just establish this scenery. It's a city. There's immigrants. There's all kinds of activity, and everybody's hot. At the top of 197, here's another picture of the inside of Archer's thoughts. He did not care to be seen, watch in hand, within view of the hotel, and his unaided reckoning of the lapse of time led him to conclude that if Madame Olenska was so long in reappearing, it could only be because she had met the emissary and had been waylaid by him. At the thought, Archer's apprehension rose to anguish. So he didn't want to take out his watch, I presume, because he didn't want to make it look like he was waiting for somebody. And so he doesn't know what time it is. Turns out she had been absent just 3 minutes. There's the narrator telling us this is all going on in his head. And yeah, I mean, we all do this too. Why is my kid late? Why is my kid late? Oh, God. It's because she's in the ditch. It's always that. She's never in the ditch. 197, 2 paragraphs down, seated side by side on a bench of the half-empty boat, they found that they had hardly anything to say to each other, or rather, that what they had to say communicated itself best in the blessed silence of their release and their isolation. So, we suspect that May would not have been too happy about this, though we know that her response would have been, be nice to Ellen, because she can spin these things with some cleverness. Next paragraph. As the paddle wheels began to turn and wharves and shipping to recede through the veil of heat, it seemed to Archer that everything in the old familiar world of habit was receding also. He longed to ask Madame Olenska if she did not have the same feeling, the feeling that they were starting on some long voyage from which they might never return. That's what he's feeling. But at the end of this paragraph, let's see. And they were drifting forth into this unknown world that seemed to have reached the kind of deeper nearness that a touch may sunder. So they're just sitting there being companionly, but he has really generated something far greater from it. On the top of 198, she had wound a long veil about her hat, but it left her face uncovered, and Archer was struck by the tranquil gaiety of her expression. She seemed to take their adventure as a matter of course, and to be neither in fear of unexpected encounters or, what was worse, unduly elated by their possibility. There's the narrator again. Wharton is telling us that she's hinting that Ellen doesn't think anything untoward of this. She's the cousin. So she's not generating the kind of fantasy from it that Archer is. So in walk a bunch of unruly teachers. I don't know why the teachers are unruly. So he asks for a cabinet particulier, which is a private room. But and the end of this paragraph, but by being so quiet, so unsurprised, and so simple, she had managed to brush away the conventions and make him feel that to seek to be alone was the natural thing for two old friends who had so much to say to each other. So he's thinking one thing, but the narrator tells us something else, that this is okay from Ellen's point of view because they're old friends. Page 199 in the second complete paragraph. So she is telling Archer she had grown tired of what people called society. New York was kind, it was almost oppressively hospitable. Perfectly tuned phrase. Oppressively hospitable. She should never forget the way in which it had welcomed her back, but after the first flush of novelty she had found herself, as she phrased it, too different to care for the things it cared about, and so she had decided to try Washington, where one was supposed to meet more varieties of people and of opinion. So she flies on off to Washington and takes Medora with her just to make sure that Medora doesn't randomly marry somebody else. Um, and Wharton tells us she's protecting Medora from matrimonial perils, including this Dr. Carver guy who he just keeps floating in and out. Um, Dr. Carver is a very clever man. He wants a witch wife to finance his plans, and Medora is simply a good advertisement as a convert. So Medora doesn't have enough money for him, so he's gone. Um, so a convert to his new theories, to all sorts of new and crazy social schemes. But do you know, they interest me more than the blind conformity. Here's Ellen actually saying this. Conformity to tradition, somebody else's tradition that I see among our own friends. It seems stupid to have discovered America only to make it to make it into a copy of another country. And she's referring to Europe as if Americans are mimicking European customs, but have really defined them strictly. Next paragraph. Archer says the reason you like Beaufort is because he's so unlike us, and he is. Um, and Archer says we are damnably dull. We have no character, no color, no variety. I wonder, he broke out. Why don't you go back? Um, and she says, and here again, uh, this is a double star in the margin. I believe it's because of you, she says. And then she continues a few paragraphs later. At least, she continued, it was you who made me understand that under the dullness there are things so fine and sensitive and delicate that even those I most cared for in my other life looked cheap in comparison. I don't know how to explain myself. She drew together her troubled brows, but it seems as if I'd never before understood with how much that is hard and shabby and base the most exquisite pleasures may be paid. So she believes he has opened worlds for her in the same way that she has opened it for him. She says at the bottom of 200, for a long time I've hoped this chance would come, that I might tell you how you've helped me, what you've made of me. So there is a spark here of the artistic soul. I think that's what they're defining. Top of 201. Yes, for I'm of your making much more than you ever were of mine. I'm the man who married one woman because another one told him to. Yikes. And so he gets what a compromise he made. Maybe he gets it. I'm not sure he does. And then mid page 201. If it not, she continued, pursuing her own thought with a painful application. If it's not worthwhile to have given up, to have missed things, so that others may be saved from disillusionment and misery, then everything I came home for, everything that made my other life seem by contrast so bare and so poor because no one there took account of them, all these things are a sham or a dream. She's hinting that it's not worth it for Archer to make somebody else miserable. That would be May. Uh, Towards the bottom of 201. Not if you've staked your all on the success of my marriage. My marriage, he said savagely, isn't going to be a sight to keep you here. She made no answer, and he went on. What's the use? You gave me my first glimpse of real life, and at the same moment you've asked me to go on with a sham one. It's beyond human enduring. That's all. Um, we think he comprehends what he has given up, but we already know from Ellen that she doesn't see anything wrong with meeting in a private room with Archer because it really is defined in her mind as meeting up with an old friend. So then she says, "Oh, don't say that when I'm enduring it," she burst out, her eyes filling. And Archer, let's see, the face exposed her as much as if it had been her whole person, with the soul behind it. Archer stood dumb, overwhelmed by what it suddenly told him. You too? Oh, all this time, you too? That's kind of sad. Mid-paragraph on 202, now his imagination spun about the hand as about the edge of a vortex, but still he made no effort to draw near. He had known the love that is fed on caresses and feeds them, but this passion that was closer than his bones was not to be superficially satisfied. Next paragraph, but after a moment the sense of waste and ruin overcame him. There they were, close together, safe and shut in, yet so chained to their separate destinies that they might as well have been half the world apart. Again, double star in the margin. They are chained to their destinies. Towards the bottom, and that as that she raised her clearest eyes. I promise you, not as long as you hold out, not as long as we can look straight at each other like this. So she's saying we we can't participate in a romance. As long as you stay back and play your part, then I'll stay here. He dropped into his chair. What her answer really said was, if you lift a finger, you'll drive me back to all the abominations you know of and all the temptations you half guess, suggesting the temptations, suggesting that she ran off with the secretary. It's just underscored here. Um, and on the top of 203, what a life for you. Oh, as long as it's a part of yours, and mine a part of yours. She nodded. And that's to be all for either of us? Well, it is all, isn't it? 2 paragraphs later, he must do nothing to make this meeting their last. He must leave their future in her care, asking only that she should keep fast hold of it. It's a little reminiscent of the fact that in his own marriage, May drives the boat, drives the events, drives the social the socialness, and here Ellen is in charge, but she's dictating the terms. And then she says, I won't go back. Next chapter, about 5 lines down, nevertheless, for a man sick with unsatisfied love, and parting for an indefinite period from the object of his passion, he felt himself almost humiliatingly calm and comforted. It was the perfect balance she had held between their loyalty to others and their honesty to themselves that had so stirred and yet tranquilized him. Again, that's a double star. Wharton is telling us how their relationship has unfolded. and he turned away. This is the end of the paragraph. The conviction remained with him of having saved out of their meeting much more than he had sacrificed. So at least they get to still be friends. At the bottom of 204, no, she would go only if she felt herself becoming a temptation to Archer, a temptation to fall away from the standard they had both set up. Now, that goes to the article that we read, where the author set up these dichotomies, and yet they're not stereotyped. Her choice would be to stay near him as long as he did not ask her to come nearer, and it depended on himself to keep her just there, safe but secluded. Um, and then it describes him walking along in a golden blur. Mid-paragraph, the young man stood looking about him with a dazed air of a foreigner. Remember the tutor? The tutor's back. Monsieur Riviere. Um, and we don't really learn too much about him until page 206. He tells Archer that he is on a special mission. So now the little bits of information are starting to be revealed for us. This was the emissary that Ellen had gone into the hotel to contact. At the top of 207. Now remember, Archer liked this guy. He was the tutor, and he wanted to go to New York in order to get another job because his protege, the student, was graduating, and so here he's appeared. Monsieur Riviere bent his head. Not He's on an emissary, not on my own behalf. On that score, I have fully dealt with myself. I should like, if I may, to speak to you about Countess Olenska. There's a really nice image at the end of the next paragraph. But when they came, they sent the blood rushing to his temples as if he had been caught by a bent back branch in a thicket. You know what that feels like if you're walking through a thicket, or if you are driving your lawnmower and you get whacked in the face by something. Sarah saw me driving my lawnmower. I bought myself a John Deere. I did, and I cut my own lawn. It's like having a go-kart that only goes 4.5 miles per hour. It's so much fun. Anyway, that's the branch. Down towards the bottom of page 207, he says, Monsieur, I am convinced to make it equally a failure with her family. So, unknown to Archer, the family is talking about Ellen's divorce. They know that Archer doesn't approve, so they've cut him out. And this emissary, the tutor, Monsieur Riviere, has been in cahoots with them, with the family, talking to the family about preventing this divorce. On the top of the next page, let's see. Archer says, should you have thought, since I suppose you're appealing to me on the ground of my relationship to Madame Olenska, that I should take a view contrary to the rest of her family? He's pretty mad at having been left out. At the bottom of page 208, Monsieur Riviere gazed back at him with anguish. You do, then, agree with the rest of the family that in the face of the new proposals I have brought, it is hardly possible for Madame Olenska not to return to her husband. Well, we know that's not true. Archer, at top of page 209, sat silent with a sense of clinging to the edge of a sliding precipice. A few lines later, he saw in a flash that if the family had ceased to consult him, it was because some deep tribal instinct warned them that he was no longer on their side. And then he recalled, with a start of comprehension, a remark of May's during their drive home from Mrs. Manson Mingott's on the day of the archery meeting. May says, perhaps after all, Ellen would be happier with her husband. This is a really important little clue. Next paragraph. Her careless allusion had no doubt been the straw held up to see which way the wind blew. The result had been reported to the family, and thereafter Archer had been tacitly omitted from their counselors. He admired the tribal discipline, which made May bow to this decision. So May dropped a little crumb to see how he would respond. If you recall, he responded that she should not go back to her husband, and May had the evidence she needed. Let's see. But she probably shared the family view that Madame Olenska would be better off as an unhappy wife than as a separated one, and that there was no use in discussing the case with Newland, who had an awkward way of suddenly not seeming to take the most fundamental things for granted. They suspect in Archer that he has stepped away from the tribal loyalty, and they don't consult him anymore. And this is all being revealed by this French tutor, someone that Archer had liked when they met on the honeymoon. And let's see, look on the top of the next page. He had not to wait a moment for an answer. To beg you, monsieur, to beg you with all the force I am capable, not to let her go back. Oh, don't let her. Well, that was a surprise, I am sure. So somehow this French tutor knows Olenski. And in fact, he tells us down there, down on the bottom of this page, that he had known him for years. And it was in the course of these two talks that I changed my mind, that I came to see things differently. May I ask what led to this change? Simply seeing the change in her. Remember, May had said something similar. At the top of 211, he's in his office now. Archer has gone back to his office, and he sees there's a calendar with the features of the President of the United States. I looked it up. It's Ulysses S. Grant. That was such a conversation should be going on anywhere within the millions of square miles, subject to his rule. That we don't need that. But anyway, I thought you'd think that was interesting. Of course, it is, because this is just a few years after the Civil War. And let's see, she's an American, next paragraph, and that if you're an American of her kind, and maybe the artistic type, things that are accepted in certain other societies, or at least put with as a part of a general convenient give and take, become unthinkable, simply unthinkable. So here is the contrast between tolerance and intolerance between America and Europe. If Madame Olenska's relations understood what these things were, their opposition to her returning would no doubt be as unconditional as her own. But they seemed to regard her husband's wish to have her back as proof of an irresistible longing for domestic life, when in fact we keep getting hints that the situation between Ellen and Olenski was probably not a good one. Wharton keeps hinting that things were catastrophic for Ellen there. And he says, whereas it's far from being as simple as that. So Olenski probably stepped out of his marriage. Things are a lot more tolerant in Europe, but here, once she got here, she was figuring that she would be brought into the fold and accepted, and to a degree she was, but she's too outside the norm, and what they really want is a manifestation of what they think is socially acceptable, which is that she's got to go back to her husband. And we know this. We already know from having read this over and over and over and over and over that an unmarried woman or a divorced woman at the time might as well just give up one's connections to family and society. That's the American point of view. So we are going to stop there. We've reached the end of the pages that I have set up for us, but we've also run out of time. So thank you all for coming again. I will see you next week, and Next week is week 7 already. I can't even believe it. And so long for now. Goodbye.